You ever try your best and still fail? It's one of the most frustrating and disheartening things to ever experience. You put all this time and effort into something that only a handful of people will care for, and the rest will just ridicule. There have been many examples of musicians, artists, and writers whose works either went unnoticed or unappreciated for a long time. And when people started to finally come around to their works, most of the time they were long dead and couldn't reap the benefits. Sega sure knows that feeling. But unlike most artists, they're still alive and can tell the tale. The sixth generation of gaming was probably the most competitive. Since Sony dominated the generation before and completely destroyed the tight grip Nintendo held prior, the main goal for everybody was to beat Sony. And nobody could even make a dent. You see, the PlayStation 2 sold a very solid 155 million units. The new gen Xbox was the best seller out of the sixth generation that wasn't the PS2, with a good 24 million units. Nintendo sold a little less with their GameCube, selling about 21 million units. And all the way in last place was Sega's very own Dreamcast, with 9.13 million units. The Dreamcast is so cool. For Sega's last console, they really went out with a bang instead of a piddle. What really stinks about that fact is, I doubt the general public even know what a Dreamcast is. I'm sure most people thought the Genesis was just a one-hit wonder, and if you tell them about the future consoles, they'll give the same reaction as if you told them about the newest season of The Simpsons. It's like, wait, they still do that? And I don't really blame the general public either. Not only did the console sell less than Sega's previous console, the Sega Saturn, which already didn't sell well, but it only lasted a couple years as opposed to the usual about 5 years a console will go through. But the people who do know of the Dreamcast consider it to be one of the best consoles of all time. And that's what makes the console's failure a lot more disappointing. It's like one of those up-and-coming actors who have a lot of potential and they just got placed in like one bad movie that basically ruined their entire life and they end up a convicted felon. The history of this console is crazy from beginning to end. Something was always going on that was just nuts, such as their feud with Sony or EA, a little bit of piracy, and problems that Sega were still attempting to recover from almost a decade later. So I thought it would be fun to talk about the Dreamcast, some peripherals and games and anything else I wanted to mention. But first, the history. We gotta know how we got here. Before I talk about the Dreamcast itself, we first have to mention the Sega Genesis. Why is that? Because some of the reasons why the Dreamcast failed were because of the sins committed during the Genesis era. You see, the Sega Genesis sold very well. It was the only console that could rival Nintendo during their reign in the late 80s and early 90s. Prior to the Genesis, Nintendo was pulling that Ken flowchart when put up against any other console. About 30 million Genesis units were sold, so Sega was probably feeling pretty good about this whole console thing. There's just one problem. The PlayStation was looking to be the best fucking thing in the world. So Sega was having a stroke and said, we need to release this next console right now so we can kick PlayStation in the nuts before it becomes real and shivs us in the side and kills us. They ended up crafting the Sega Saturn and released it about a month before the PlayStation, and it flopped. While the Saturn did initially kick Sony in the nuts because of a very solid day one lineup, the most damning one being a near arcade perfect version of Virtua Fighter. It helped that later on we got games like a better version of Mega Man 8 with extra content that hasn't been re-released since, which Capcom, what the hell, do you hate us? I got Mega Man 8 on PS1, and I don't really feel like selling a kidney or a part of my brain just to fight Woodman in a different engine. But what caused the PlayStation to get the edge was the fact that the Saturn was just a pain in the ass to develop for. The internals were just too complicated for most people to care about. Oh yeah, I also forgot to mention this. The Sega Saturn was released earlier than it was supposed to. This not only pissed off the third-party developers, since they didn't get enough time to build up more launch titles, but even retailers were mad. So while Sega won the battle, they sure as hell didn't win the war. In contrast to the befuddlement that was the Saturn, the PlayStation was much easier to develop for, and it was cheaper too. This caused a negative feedback loop on Sega's end and a positive loop on Sony's end. Because of the difficulty, nobody wanted to develop for this thing, thus the console sold less, which caused developers to be like, I want to make money. This isn't charity work, okay? So less games were made, which caused the console to sell even less, which caused the developers to go, hey, fuck you. There also wasn't a mainline Sonic game released for the console. There was supposed to be one called Sonic X-Treme, but after some infighting and Yuji Naka straight up saying, good luck, bye, the game was canceled. It's not shocking to say that Sonic is the most important thing that Sega has. Without Sonic, not even the Genesis would have sold as well as it did. But it wasn't just the Saturn being technically difficult to develop for. During the Genesis days, Sega released 2 console add-ons. The first one was the Sega CD, which released in late 1991. It was a CD add-on. No way. CD add-ons were the shit back then. Nintendo, Sega, and Atari at some point had a CD add-on to their consoles. Even lesser-known consoles like the TurboGrafx-16 had one, and that was the only way to play the original Street Fighter at home. This alone wouldn't have done much, but Sega just could not help themselves. So they released another console add-on that would boost the Genesis's power for some games. Yeah, no, they couldn't just make a CD add-on. No, they had to, we need more. Sega was like, let's make a 32-bit add-on to the Genesis and release it 6 months before the Saturn, and you know know what, let's just fuck it. We'll release it in Japan sometime after we release the Saturn. Who cares? This becomes a problem when developers have to make the decision between either developing for the bigger install base, but lesser powered and storage Genesis, the lesser install based but more storage Sega CD, the unproven but probably going to be smaller install base because let's be real, what's the fucking point of this thing? But stronger 32X, or the newer, flashier, stronger, and higher storaged Sega Saturn. And then you have the customers. So imagine you're a kid in the 90s, right? You're watching the newest episode of The Simpsons every Thursday at 8, or Sunday at 8, or holy shit, Fox, what is your deal? Did they just blindfold themselves and then threw a dart to see when their most popular show was gonna air? Will it be Sundays, Mondays, or during the fucking rapture? I don't know. Anyways, you see an advertisement for the Sega Saturn, after 30 PlayStation adverts, and you get a little freaked out. You got your Sega Genesis and your sack of games. You go to the store with your mom. It's your birthday or whatever, so who cares? You see the Sega CD, the 32X, and the new Sega Saturn. You only got so much money, alright? So for this hypothetical, your mom or your dad or your grandma or your dog lets you pick out whatever console or add-on and one game. What are you going to pick? That's right, a PlayStation with a bootleg memory card and 2 games. The console is $100 cheaper than the Saturn. It also helps that when buying a PlayStation, you have like a dillion more choices for games. So Sega was like, God damn it, the PlayStation is winning. Even releasing it early didn't help, and now the public is mad at us for our poor planning. Because of this, the Saturn got axed 3 years later, and they started development on their 4th and final console, the Sega Dreamcast. They decided to, once again, attempt to beat Sony by releasing their next console first. And what a surprise! It actually sort of worked. You gotta remember that back then, the bit wars were a lot more prevalent, and going from one console generation to another showed much more of an immediate difference. I'd say this was the case all the way up until like the 7th going into 8th generation. So going from the Sega Saturn or PS1 to the Dreamcast looked way more noticeable. Look at Sonic Adventure versus something like Crash Bandicoot 3, or Shenmue versus literally anything. So they were able to get a good boost in sales, but that came to an immediate stop when Sony said, okay Sega, our console will lap yours in fucking polygons. And guess what? We can play DVDs. People don't want to listen to the sign anymore. They want to see it. So even with the Dreamcast releasing about a year and a half before the PS2, it didn't have much of a lasting effect. Sony also lied about this polygon shit. They could still do a lot, but not as much as they said they could. That didn't matter though. Sony was still just one-upping the whole market at the time. Sega couldn't even squeeze out some last-minute revenue from the Genesis, as it was just about discontinued in 1997. And if it couldn't get any worse, pirating Dreamcast games is a very easy thing to do. There was an attempt to combat piracy, but that ironically made it easier. They didn't pull some Sony shit with the discs having like wavy grooves, so actually getting a burned disc meant you have to know a guy who knew a guy. But for the Dreamcast, you didn't even need a swap disc. All you needed was a CDR and a CDI file of whatever game you wanted. This caused an odd narrative to go around where people said that piracy was the main reason why the Dreamcast failed, and I couldn't agree less. It's definitely a factor, but to pirate a Dreamcast game, you still needed the Dreamcast. You know, PCs pirating newer consoles wasn't as common as it is now. It doesn't really matter though, Sega was still in a sticky situation, and what usually happens in those sticky situations? You just throw shit at the wall until something, God, anything works. This caused the Sega Dreamcast to be one of the most experimental consoles I've ever seen, in pretty much every sense possible, from the console itself, to the games, to even some of the peripherals. It was the first console to feature online multiplayer and had DLC. The memory cards, instead of being plugged into the console, were placed into the controller and had a screen for showing additional information. And with the games, existing franchises took different directions than their previous entries, and newer IPs tried out ideas that were never really attempted before, or at least to that extent. Because Sega's third-party support wasn't as solid, with, you know, them fucking up with the Sega CD and the 32X and the Saturn, well, except Capcom. I don't know what the higher-ups at Sega were doing to those Capcom guys, but it worked. They were probably the best third-party developer for the Dreamcast. Look at all their releases. They even helped a lot with the Saturn. But other than Capcom, Sega was more or less on their own. So their first-party games needed a lot to prove. And what do you know? I'd say they proved quite a bit. Their first-party games are really good. There's a reason why the Dreamcast has had such a lively cult following for the past 2 decades. A ton of these games have a certain charm that other consoles just don't have. And that's why I wanted to make a video about the Dreamcast instead of, I don't know, the Xbox One Series X Epic Edition. You know, quick side note, why the fart did Xbox name their most recent console the Series X? They totally should have named it after their project name. Imagine like the Xbox Scarlet or whatever. It sounds way cooler than the Series X, because that makes it sound like it's a car. And what's super stupid is that when parents bought what they thought was the Series X when it first released, they were actually buying an Xbox One X. I'm not going to talk about every Dreamcast game or even every significant one, that'd be too insane. But I wanted to review a bunch of games that I had an interest in. I also tried to make sure that I covered all the bases in terms of genre genre, so I'll talk a bit about arcade games in the Crazy Taxi segment and a bit about horror games in the Ill Bleed section. Before we start talking about the games, I just gotta show you something. I made it a couple seconds ago, but it's so true that it's scary. First, Sega releases a console.
This motherfucker right here can play Desert Bus.
Then people find it has a glaring flaw.
Fucking need 30 RAM cards to play KOF.
It doesn't sell many units. And what does Sega do? They kill off the console.
This is all at the same time of getting non-stop comments from investors like this. Of course this pussy isn't making a sequel to Wild Woody.
Sonic Adventure is the most important game on Dreamcast, not only because it was the best-selling Dreamcast game, but before Sonic Adventure 1, people were refunding their Dreamcasts, as there weren't too many console-selling games before Sonic Adventure 1's release, as it was only a launch title outside of Japan. Well, that and Japan's launch lineup was pitiful. Since there was no mainline Sonic game on the Saturn, consumers didn't trust that the Dreamcast would release one. That gave Sonic Adventure a lot of hype at the time, because it would essentially make or break the Dreamcast. With all of that being said, how does Sonic Adventure hold up? I'd say it's fine. It's definitely a fun game. It isn't as great as Mario 64, but I don't think anyone was going to argue nor expect that. But it is a good game worth your time. What made Sonic Adventure unique at the time is that instead of having one story of Sonic's wacky adventure, Sonic Adventure has multiple storylines that will sometimes, depending on what character you're playing as, connect with another storyline. I saw a video comparing it to Pulp Fiction, but I've never seen that. But I have seen the Simpsons episode that does something similar with its storytelling, where you only get bits of a certain party's story and you have to piece it together. It's something about Homer getting his penis cut off and he's got to reattach it. Bart gets blue hair waxed by the Mafia and Lisa gets pranked by the incel. It's a pretty good episode overall. So with Sonic Adventure, they do the same type of storytelling, not the plot. Another thing that made Sonic Adventure 1 special is its voice acting. While Mario 64 had voice acting, it was only Peach's letter and Mario saying wahoo before he falls into the Shadow Realm. But Sonic and Friends said full sentences. The only real problem with the voice acting is that those sentences can just sound a bit awkward at times.
Now I have 4 lovely emeralds. Chaos!
Come on, man. Chaos isn't a lost dog. You know where he is. He's right over there. You don't have to sound confused.
Chaos!
But let's be real. There was rarely a game in the 90s that had good voice acting. I'd say Metal Gear Solid was probably the best at the time, but right next to Metal Gear was Resident Evil and Mega Man.
Hey, Zach! Why must I fight you? We are not enemies!
Shut up!
Actually, playing Sonic Adventure, though, it's pretty fun. There are 6 campaigns with differing playstyles, and for the most part, I think all of them are at least alright. Sonic's is cool, he controls well enough, and while the camera can be literally the worst at times, those are usually at the slower parts in the levels. My favorite stage in the whole game is Sonic's Casinopolis. You get to play pinball, it's the coolest shit in the world. And you know what the best part is? You can't go bankrupt. Tails is a bit boring, unfortunately. His gimmick is that you race Sonic or whoever to the end of the level. Even the bosses are the same, so I hope you're ready to fight the embodiment of lard 30 times. Knuckles is cool as hell. You gotta look for pieces of the Master Emerald after Eggman sends Chaos to destroy it. You can climb walls, fly, and beat up the locals. It's great. In Big the Cat's levels and campaign, I don't really mind too much. I got a hold of the controls quickly enough for me not to get pissed at anything. And the fishing, it's fishing. Now, I didn't record any of Amy, E102 Gamma, or Supersonic's final chapter, so I'll just use Game Grumps footage because that's all I have left. Amy's stages are really cool because you have this big-ass robot chasing after you. It's some shit straight out of Resi 2. And even if caving its skull in is pretty easy, there's still a bit of rush to it all, which makes Amy's campaign feel completely different in comparison to the rest of the characters. And E102 Gamma levels have you shoot down robots and such so you can keep the timer from ticking down. Shoot more robots, get more time. And the Supersonics chapter ties the whole story together with an epic final battle with Super Chaos. Speaking of the story, we get to see the thrilling adventure of Sonic attempting to kill a bald man for wanting to make an amusement park, and the effects his goal has on the robots and people he cares about, such as this robot having to deal with the grief of his dead brother. The story is actually highly regarded in the Sonic fandom for being a bit dark in an otherwise joyous game. Now, I'm not too big of a I play games for the story kind of guy. It's not the reason as to why I play games, but that's okay. It's hard for me to care about a game's story in general, unless it pulls punches like a Mori, or the gameplay is heavily tied to the story like Resident Evil, or goes apeshit like Resident Evil. I'd rather just play the game. But looking at the cutscenes in Sonic Adventure can be fun. Too bad you can't skip them. But wait, where are we? This sure as hell didn't happen in a level. Sonic Adventure features overworlds called Adventure Fields, which contain cool places to explore. You can talk to the locals to see what they have to say, look at the cozy scenery, or you can find little secrets like Chow Eggs or upgrades. The upgrades can be something as small as being able to run faster, to something more impactful like a ring that allows you to charge through other rings. And with the Chow Eggs, have you ever wanted to take care of a Tamagotchi in a Sonic game? Well, here you go. Chows are a nice distraction from the main game. You take care of these little bastards and can even have them compete in races. In the Dreamcast Sonic games, the Chow Gardens are a bit bare bones, like in the GameCube port port of Sonic Adventure 2, you can partake in illegal dogfights, which makes it like way better. Unfortunately, the best way to play Sonic Adventure 1 is still on the Dreamcast. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, Sonic Adventure got a port/upgraded version that was released on the GameCube called Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut, which changed the main character models to align more to the Sonic Adventure 2 style. And they also made the Chow Gardens closer to how it was executed in Sonic Adventure 2. This wouldn't be too much of a problem even with the conflicting art style. Look at this Sonic Adventure 2 Knuckles right next to the Sonic Adventure 1 Knuckles. But it also seems that they messed with collision. I think this area in Emerald Coast is famous for, more often than not, having Sonic clip through the level. That never happens in the Dreamcast version. But guess what? It gets worse. When the games got ported to Xbox 360, they somehow fucked up the port even more. Then, when it got ported to Steam, it got even worse. It wasn't just odd collisions or model changes, textures and audio quality were just sometimes worse. And the 360 version of DX did this weird shit where some of the content that was introduced in the GameCube version, you now had to purchase that as DLC. So every port of Sonic Adventure ended up being a shittier version of the previous. This causes an odd revisionist history of Sonic Adventure, where the people that originally played the Dreamcast version who were nostalgic for the game ended up buying an inferior version, which caused them to think to themselves, damn, was it always this bad? Luckily on Steam you can mod the shit out of it and turn it back into the Dreamcast version. You want to talk about a game with style?
Jet Set.
Grind Radio. Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks, copyright laws. What's funny about this is that in the game's cutscenes, they still say Jet Set Radio. Other than the box art and title screens, they did not care. Which is fair, copyright laws are fucked over here. And by the time a sequel came out, Sega was able to name it Jet Set instead of Grind, so I guess the world fixed itself for the sake of Hideki Nagamuna, the best Twitter user to exist. In fact, he's like the only reason to use the damn site. Anyways, Jet Set Radio is a game where you run from the authorities while spray painting the town with sweet logos. Look, you can even draw your own. I really like both the art style and the music of Jet Set. It's probably the most notable thing about the game. Now, some may ask, damn, this shit goes hard, Kakarot, I want to play it right now, how do you play it? The main task of Jet Set Radio is to tag specific areas in a limited amount of time. You're usually going up against some sort of rival graffiti gang who will tag the place with like lame designs. Ugh, get that shit out of here, mine are better. And after a bit of making the local areas look actually good, the police show up and try to ruin our fun. But instead of Paul Blart chasing after you with his stupid Segway, you got CIA officials breaking the Geneva Convention because some knuckleheads are skating about. They use tear gas. That's illegal for a reason. Oh, fuck. It doesn't help that since you're using roller skates, it's like you're always walking on ice levels in Mario, which makes these tighter jumps just way more difficult. This wouldn't be that much of a problem if the camera wasn't the worst. The camera is usually right behind you, unless you have the character turn backwards, but using the triggers, you're able to switch it right behind you. If only the camera switch button wasn't the same as the tag button. So when you want to switch the camera, you gotta like jump around a bit and then turn the character before you can actually have the camera in the right position. It's so awkward, but you know, it could be worse. You could die. Never mind, it's worse than dying. This controller is whack. I think the Dreamcast controller is fine overall. There are better ones that existed in the same and previous console generation, but for the most part it gets the job done. I like the way it emulates the console design itself, you know, with the little circular indent. You know, it ain't that cool. It even has analog triggers, which is really neat. In fact, it might be the earliest controller with those. The wire going on the bottom of the controller is a bit odd, even with the context of needing it for the VMUs. Those are the memory cards. It's still a bit bizarre. And this little wire holder thing puts a band-aid on the problem, so it's not like the end of the world. And, you know, I get not having bumpers, it's like whatever, but not having a second analog stick is crazy. There are a handful of games that don't really need one. Even a game like Phantasy Star Online is fine with the camera system as is, even though it would be better with a second stick. But it's a slower paced game, so the more quicker decisions that you need to make are more attack and item based, instead of being more movement based. It's still important, but at least you don't have armed soldiers with guns and toxic air cans being thrown at you. But a game like Jet Set Radio, where speed and position is very important, it makes something like a camera problem a hell of a lot more prevalent. I hope someday I find Rick Pickle Sanchez so I can bother him until he teleports me to another dimension where the Dreamcast actually had another analog stick. The PlayStation's DualShock controller existed about a year before the Dreamcast's launch. It'd be a year and a half if we consider the dual analog controller, which was basically the DualShock before the DualShock. And every other controller in the 6th generation had 2 analog sticks, so it makes the Dreamcast's controller stick out a lot more and not in a great way. If there was a second analog stick, I think Jet Set Radio would benefit the most out of any other Dreamcast game. Actually, moving around in the game space though is very flashy, and I definitely like how stylish the jumps can be. Without my epic jumping skills, there's no way in hell I could reach up here to spray paint Goatsy on the billboards. The minigame that appears when you actually have to tag something though is pretty fun. You point the analog stick in a certain direction to paint the walls or something. It's almost like using a special move in a fighting game.
Owen, did I see you correctly parry the first hit of that super and then drop your parry?
Listen, Greg.
I'm Iron 3.
My bad. You're right. My apologies.
Because of that, it's pretty easy to get fast at tagging. The only thing that'll stop you at times are the local police, which gives tagging a bit of tension at times, and I really like that. You also have to collect paint cans across the map too. You can only hold 20 at a time, so can management is very important. You don't want to make the trek to this super high up area only to run out of paint, and then you gotta slip and strip your way back down, grab what you need. Oh fuck, I fell again and I ran out of time. So I'm conflicted. I really like the style of Jet Set Radio, but actually playing the game can be a bit frustrating at times, to the point where I can just get fatigued quickly. The highs are like a good 9.0 on IMDb, and the lows are like a friggin' 6.8. You know, since we're talking about Jet Set, you know, a game all about movement and such, we might as well talk about...
Hey, come on over, have some fun with Crazy Taxi!
Back in the 80s and 90s, arcade ports were very important for consoles. It gave consumers a way to play their favorite arcade games at home, especially in America, where arcades were dying out pretty quickly at the turn of the century. Sega always prioritized arcade games on their consoles. They pretty much always launched a console with a couple, so Sega really wanted you to play arcade games on their consoles, because it essentially showed the power of the console. Since an arcade's internals were built specifically for that one arcade game, if a console was able to replicate those games without that special hardware, it would be a huge selling point, which makes it no surprise that when Sega ported motherfucking Crazy Taxi, it was in the top 5 best-selling Dreamcast games. Crazy Taxi is the shit. It's so simple. You drive a taxi like you're in California and took Galaxy Gas. You just take the common people to an airport or a KFC or to a Pizza Hut. But you only got so much time, alright? It's an arcade game after all. But even with that limiting 50 seconds to boot, if you do a well enough job, you can theoretically go on forever. I mean, this guy's run took 2 hours. It helps that the driving is almost sporadic. Like 1 second you're fine, and then the next you turn a little too far to the left and whoops, you're on the moon now. Your average round... I think I just got CTE. What was I talking about? This music's pretty nice. Oh shit, I think I killed that guy. Whatever, man, I only got like a minute left, and this guy's gotta attend church. Honestly, if Crazy Taxi just had the arcade runs, I would have still loved it. But for the console ports, they added a little something extra called Crazy Box. Crazy Box is basically a missions mode where you're placed into special scenarios and have to use pretty much every tool in your very small arsenal to complete them. It's a very cool way to learn how to super boost or drift. You even get little tips on how to deal with these missions. You can do a jump contest, platform in the Bubsy 3D realm, or go bowling. I can't beat this one. Now, what I'm about to talk about isn't really Dreamcast related, but did you know that Sega sued 20th Century Fox because of a Simpsons game called The Simpsons Road Rage? Because that game is basically just Crazy Taxi with a Simpsons coat of paint on it, and apparently Sega patented the type of gameplay Road Rage has? This is real. What's funny about Road Rage is that it's basically just a shittier Crazy Taxi. It controls worse and looks bad. Why is it that when any adult animated series gets a 3D game, it always looks bad? It's not even like they can't produce a good 3D model of these characters. Like, look at the ones from the Homer Cubed Treehouse of Horror segment, or the Back to the Multiverse Family Guy episode. It might be some budgetary reason. I'm sure Fox didn't give shit to these devs. I'm surprised Sega even bothered to sue these guys. Why even put the effort in? Oh, 3 million copies. Alright then, that shit sold more than Sonic Adventure on Dreamcast. Yikes. If I were Sega, I'd be pissed too. Crazy Taxi isn't the only arcade game on Dreamcast that was really good. In fact, most of them, from what I've heard, are pretty close if not arcade perfect. Basically, every Capcom fighter on Dreamcast was great, like Marvel vs. Capcom 2. On Dreamcast, it was like way better than the Xbox and PS2 ports that actually got released later on. And Soul Calibur, that was raw as hell, thanks Namco. But I wanted to mention Crazy Taxi, because I like it the most. Now, let's shift gears into the slowest game ever. In Shenmue, you play as Shenmue in the town of Shenmue, looking for the elusive Shenmue. What the fuck is this game? For what was, at the time, the most expensive game to make, Shenmue really feels like a mixed bag. And that's unfortunate, because there are good things in Shenmue, like the environments. Especially in 1999, this looked great. Shenmue blew everything else out of the water graphics-wise. The detail is crazy. You're even able to go into this first-person perspective to look at anything more in-depth if you so desire. You can even open individual drawers and cabinets. It's pretty nice. The areas that Shenmue takes place in also feel very lived in. People will walk to and from random places, they'll enter buildings, sweep outside, play arcade games, flicker goon for 12 hours. Shops will open and close depending on the time, which moves on its own. Nothing will stop it, so you gotta make each day count. Not really though, because while you do have like a day limit, you're going to beat the game months before you ever reach that limit, as long as you aren't like jerking off for months on end, which is impossible. And even if it isn't as fleshed out as Majora's Mask's daily system is, it's still very impressive. You can talk to anyone as well, and in the off chance you actually get into a tussle with somebody, the fighting system isn't bad. It's basically a dire version of Virtual Fighter, with special moves and everything. The plot itself isn't bad either. I mean, how could you fuck up a story about avenging your father? But actually playing the game, most of the time spent in Shenmue is gathering information on who and where this guy Lon D is, as he killed Ryo's father at the start of the game. But how do you gather information? By talking to the general public. In the beginning of the game, you start with some notes that mention men in black suits. When you ask people around your town about these men, some will say, I don't know shit, but these chuckle nuts near the phone booth that gossip all the time probably know something. So you go to the mean girls and they tell you about another clue, which causes you to go on this wild goose chase. Add a couple fights, exploring, getting distracted, and old homeless men telling you about special moves into the mix, and it seems like Shenmue would be a very fun game, or at least a game that wouldn't cause much frustration. Oh boy, I wish. There are multiple times in Shenmue where you just have to sit and wait. Some guy will want to meet you somewhere at a specific time. It could be later in the day, and when that's the case, it's not so bad. Just piss off in the arcade and play Space Harrier until the time comes. Or it could be the next day at a shop that takes a hot minute to open up. This wouldn't be a problem if you could sleep whenever you wanted or had the ability to speed up time. But no, you gotta Shenmue live every in-game second. Now, I get that Shenmue is a slow burn game. You're supposed to take it all in and chill out. Like I said earlier, you'll get distracted. Try to obtain some little figurines at the gachapons and talk to the locals. That's how I enjoyed it. I played Shenmue during Christmas time, so it's not like I was gonna do anything else. I also found it really funny how when the game itself neared Christmas, a mall Santa would walk around town and give random shops a promotion while sounding like he had polio.
Merry Christmas! Ho, ho, ho!
But then I got to the forklift section. About 2/3 of the way through the game, you have to get a job. Not for money purposes, no. The lady that allows Shenmue to live at her house gives him a daily allowance. It's for gaining information about some gang connected to Lon D and whatever the fuck they're doing right now. But what is that job? Bringing boxes from one place to another. Using a forklift, of course. You have to do it every day, from 9 to 5, with lunch breaks in between, until you get fired because of story events. Can Lon D kill me instead? I hate this shit. Imagine working a real 9 to 5, in a dead-end job, only to go home and do the same shit in Shenmue. Except instead of working that 9 to 5 for information about this Scooby-Doo mystery, you work so you can keep the lights on. That's not fun, that's depressing. And I think these 3 words really put Shenmue's problems into a quick little blurb. It's too real. While this can be a positive for Shenmue, like the scenery and attention to detail, this realism even shows in little things, like Ryo having to take a breather because his carbonated drink is getting a little bit too much for him. Like, have you tried chugging a soda? A bit ago, I was dared to chug a Sprite can without burping for $10. I did it. It hurt a bit, but I did it. I got the $10 right here.
Oh fuck. Lincoln died again.
There are even some children around Ryo's neighborhood who will look up to Mr. Shenmue, and some will ask for help in some way. Like her. She wants to take care of this stray kitty, but she's like 7 and doesn't really know how to go about these things. So you have the choice to help out the little guy, and you can go get him some food. Man, I love the tomato store. The music is great, and looking at the random shit to buy is so entertaining. Every time you buy something, you get put into some sort of raffle. I never won anything, but it's neat to chat with the cleric. But that's about the last of the positives I have when it comes to Shenmue's realism. Like, talking to anyone is awesome, but a good chunk of the time when talking to that general public, they'll just be cold as fuck to you. And I'm not talking about the time some schoolgirl will tell you to piss off. That's a more comical way of going about it. I'm talking about going up to somebody, just saying hey, and then they'll respond with, "Don't talk to me, I'm busy." Like, geez, sorry for wasting your time. For a man jacking off in the street at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, you sure don't look busy. I get it's Japan, so everyone generally wants to keep to themselves, but it still sucks. I also understand that not everybody knows nor cares about the situation Ryo has gotten himself into, but this ratio of jerkwad to normal is a bit out of whack in my opinion. Might be a bit of a golden rule situation though, since if anybody asks Ryo about anything like, hey, want something? Want to hang out? Ryo will always be dismissive. If it isn't about Lon D, he does not give a shit. Like those children around Ryo's neighborhood, they'll say, "Let's play baseball!" or ask for 10 yen because they're kids and bad with money. Like, I wish I could play baseball, Millhouse, but you're not gonna help me find Lon D. For a game about relaxing and taking it all in, Ryo sure doesn't want to do that. He'd rather play QuickTime Event the game and ignore his girlfriend before he'll ever have a conversation with the guy at the spaghetti shop. Oh yeah, the QTEs. Ugh. They've existed in games about a decade before Shenmue, like Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, but those games were only QTEs, like that was the whole point of those games. You're mainly playing them for the Disney-esque visuals anyways, so it's whatever, especially for a game in the early 80s, because look at the competition. My only real problem with the QTEs in Shenmue is just, I don't like QTEs. In some contexts, it's fine, like in Shenmue 2 where you have to carry books to a table, I didn't mind that. And it's not like in Resi 4 where you have to press a combination of buttons, and if you don't get it right within a very short time span, oops, you die. I'm sure I sound aggressive towards Shenmue to the point where it might be a surprise that I only started to get annoyed during that forklifting section, and that was about 14 hours in. Before that, I was a huge Shenmue defender amongst my friends. I do recommend checking it out, at least, to see if you vibe with the visuals and story. You can get the 1+2 collection on Steam for like $30, and there's no worries about one of the discs failing on you. For anyone that hasn't seen the Oni Plays trying to play Shenmue, their Shenmue Disc 1 had problems loading. Apparently all of the Shenmue discs are real troublemakers, so I was worried that my Disc 1 would explode, but it didn't. It was Disc 2 that Epic failed on me. I would pop it in, load the game, I'd watch it load for minutes, then I'd pop it out and pop it back in again. It was the worst. I would be pacing around my basement watching random videos while praying that it would load. And sometimes it would, but then it would always crash at the same cutscene. So I had to get a bunch of CDRs and jewel cases. Yeah, we're getting fancy. I got a disc reader and a disc burner application on my computer. I found a CDI file, legally, I swear, of Shenmue Disc 2, not Shenmue 2 Disc 1. That's wrong. I burned it, bumped my desk, which fucked up the burn, so I had to get another empty CDR disc and try again while being away from my computer, and it worked. What's funny about the legal version of Shenmue Disc 2 that I got was that the normally off-brand soda machines were replaced with Coke vending machines and Coke products. This was only featured in the Japanese version of Shenmue, so I guess the CDI file had like a texture change or something. Anyways, back to the Steam version for like 5 seconds. The only real downside to playing the Steam version of Shenmue is not being able to see the little special move commands on the VMU. The VMU is the Dreamcast's memory card, but it serves more functions than just saving your epic Shenmue data. For one, it has an LCD screen which displays some extra information. It can be a blurb, some art, commands, or health. As you can see, instead of connecting to the console, it's connected straight to the controller, which is the reason why it has this little window and why the wire goes out the bottom. Each controller can hold up to 2 VMUs at a time, and sometimes like an expansion pack like a microphone. And when you check the file section in the Dreamcast menu, you can even give the VMU special icons. Some of them can be given from the games themselves, like Skies of Arcadia. And if you're able to, you can download little mini games that can be played on the VMU itself when detached from the controller. The VMU runs on some of these fuck-ass circle batteries, but don't worry, if the battery dies or you just don't have one, the VMU will still hold the memory and work when connected to the controller. Just not by itself, which is fine.
VMU sex. Urgh. I'm contracting all the AIDS. Fuck this.
It's so funny how the Dreamcast is like the Wii U before the Wii U. There's actually a couple of other things that can be compared between the two consoles, such as both having a really good library of first-party games, little third-party support, experimentations with the controllers, and the fact that both consoles failed. The only difference is that Nintendo could tank something like a console failure because it's Nintendo, duh, but also because of the Wii's major success and the DS and 3DS helping with support. I wish newer consoles had special icons for save data. Like, look at Sonic over here. He's got a big old smile because he's happy and real in my VMU. Ryo's all pissed, though. Can you stop punching my TV screen? We get it. Londi is out there. And what the fuck is this? Why can't I copy it? You can do that with any other game. What makes Psyo so special? Oh, it's an MMO. Yeah, that makes sense. Phantasy Star was Sega's main RPG series. While Sega did release other original RPGs on their consoles, how the Dreamcast had Skies of Arcadia and this other game Sega, where you help Sega in the console wars. But their main one was Phantasy Star. It originated as your typical turn-based RPG with more sci-fi space elements. You travel to planets and do cool shit. However, once the Genesis was no longer the main Sega console, the series sort of fell flat. There were collections of the games released on the Saturn, but nothing new since 1993. That was until the year 2000 with Phantasy Star Online. This game was completely different than any Phantasy Star before it. How so? Well, now you can customize your character. Oh, well, that and online play. In the year 2000 on my DreamyCasta? The Dreamcast had a built-in modem that would allow you to connect to the internet and to game servers. The modem would use dial-up, so no phone calls for you. Luckily, Sega would eventually release a broadband adapter about a year later. However, only a handful of games actually supported it since it was released so late into the console's lifespan. Year 2 for Sega was like year 5 for everybody else. But once connected, you couldn't do much because you had to pay for their online gaming service, SegaNet, which was apparently $22 a month. I get that the internet wasn't as mainstream 25 years back, but that still blows my mind. They even had Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit help advertise the Dreamcast with SegaNet. Now, it's 2024, and SegaNet shut down their servers in 2003. So how the hell do you get online in the modern day? Just like most gaming things that have been abandoned, the fans keep that shit alive. People will run personal servers for specific games for some like epic gaming nights. In fact, there are a couple of websites that I peruse called Dreamcast Live and Dreamcast Now. Dreamcast Live has like leaderboards and an online gaming schedule, and Dreamcast Now will show people using a DreamPie and that are online right now. Look at me, max my profile picture because I fucking love Always Sunny. But wait a second. What the hell is a DreamPie? While you still can use dial-up in the broadband adapters, in fact there are full guides on how to set those things up. What I did is set up a DreamPie system. Using a Raspberry Pi and a special modem connector, you will be able to access the Dreamcast interwebs without using dial-up or limiting yourself with the broadband adapter. So you can now play 2-decade-old games on a 2-decade-old system with people who are probably 2 decades older than me. And you can appreciate this cool hub that looks like it's straight out of Coruscant from Star Wars together. Is it a requirement to go online to beat Phantasy Star Online? No, not at all. You can roll credits without having to do any of this shit. The basic formula stays the same for Phantasy Star Online, whether you're online or not. The only difference is whether or not other people can see you type up a swear storm. You check out whatever themed areas you can explore, you do a bunch of side quests to get money and XP, then, when you have enough levels, you explore the planet without accepting any quests, and once you get deep enough, you fight the boss. Do that a couple times, and then you just roll credits. Pretty simple. And while there are only a couple of themed areas, the way Phantasy Star Online gives itself some longevity is that you have to explore those couple of maps multiple times. One time for beating the bosses, and the grillions of other times for side quests. Usually this would be a bad thing, but the environments look pretty nice. Look at this cave system. It has like a glistening effect like it's from an early Pokemon episode. And the further you go into these areas, the more intense and dangerous it looks. Like the forest areas, they start off very bright and sunny. But once you go deeper, it starts to get very stormy and big-ass monkeys try to kill you. In this cave system, at some point it looks like a factory was spliced in. And what the fuck, a cake shop? The quests in this game can be pretty funny at times. Like this wife who thinks her husband has like a weapons fetish. And this lady who wants to get in shape by exploring the caves with you because she ate too many healing supplies. Like, I didn't know these had calories in them. How many are in the Superman potion? Uh-oh. At least I can burn it all off while going through the forest for the 30th time. I'm even at the point where I can clean sweep enemies down here. Thank God the battling in Phantasy Star Online can be very quick. Instead of coming to a full stop with a whooshing transition just to wait for a monster encounter fight to load, and no, look at that, it's just a level 5 penis. You can just pop and boom, they're dead as hell. Consequently, however, you now have to worry about both your health and your physical placement on the map, which means dumb shit like this can happen. What? Come on, man, stop. No, like, dude, can I just get... No? Okay, alright, fuck. If you die in PSO, the only thing you lose is your equipped weapons and whatever money you had on you. Luckily, there is a bank in the main hub where you can store your money and items, but geez, I wish I didn't just die right there. You gotta make the trek back to where you died. You know, I always bring a couple weapons with me, so it's not like I'm a baby deer in headlights. But man, if only I was in multiplayer. Like I said earlier, you could play Phantasy Star Online by yourself. In fact, that's how I recommend playing through at least the forest area, but only playing Phantasy Star Online alone, that's kind of lame. With up to 3 other players, your squad can travel the lands and beat side quests together. There is even an upgraded version, version 2, released later on where you can do little mini games with your friends. I'd say if you do play PSO on Dreamcast, just get version 2. They added so much shit. They changed the lobbies, increased the level cap, added new weapons, and fixed some bugs. And if you do have a version 1 save file, not all is lost. You are able to import it into a version 2 save file. I would have played version 2, but I only got version 1. And that shit costs like $60 at the only place I trust, East Starland. What the? Why'd they tweet out the Lucky Star OP? Oh wow, I sure am excited to watch the middle-aged mom conversations about they're in high school, the TV show. I'm not even gonna make an attempt to get that shit on eBay. I don't think I've fully trusted places like eBay since I bought a bootleg copy of Pokemon Fire Red about a decade ago. Look, I have it right here. You can tell it's a bootleg because Fire Red cards aren't supposed to be transparent. While Phantasy Star Online wasn't the first MMO, it was the first one to leave an impact. So much of an impact that Sega ported it to the original Xbox and GameCube. Not the PS2, however. I guess Sega was still salty. People to this day will still hang out in PSO's main hub every Saturday night, and they'll do a good hour-and-a-half run of whatever mission they feel. It's a game that many hold with a unique fondness, which I totally get. There's something special about grinding out a game with a couple of friends while shooting the shit. If I ever think about what games I played during the COVID era with my pals, I immediately think of Left 4 Dead 2, because we played the ever-loving shit out of that game. Oh yeah, and what's great for those PSO veterans is the fact that even if they've completed every single quest, they can still download some DLC quests. Yep, the Dreamcast had DLC. Visiting some of the websites that could be accessed from the game's main menu or via the web browser, you could download DLC to your VMU and get some extra content for your games. For the most part, it would be like little extra adventures or side quests, like for Skies of Arcadia. Sonic Adventure had a lot of DLC. Most of it was just advertisements, like AT&T, Reebok, and hell, even a Famitsu magazine event, which that's pretty cool. A good chunk were dedicated to celebrations like Halloween, Christmas, Yick, or even the Dreamcast's launch itself. Sonic Adventure 1 DLC would add a bunch of billboards or decorations to the levels. It's simple, but it was very cool for the time. Now that's cool and all, you know, seeing things you couldn't before, using the VMU storage for something cool, or you could use over a fourth of your VMU storage for a fucking special move in Street Fighter Alpha. What the fuck? Imagine for a second there's a new update in Left 4 Dead 2, and all they wanted to do was unlock a before hidden weapon. Just a simple weapon like a shoe on a stick. You know, it was in the game, but you just couldn't access it in any of the levels. But it took up 250 gigabytes of storage. But even with that interesting file size, the fact that the Dreamcast had DLC at all is still very impressive. At least there wasn't any extra cost to get the DLC. That would be stupid. Xbox.
Pull the clothes hanger out of your mouth and answer me again.
Who the hell said that? Oh, what is that thing? Oh my god, are you a fish or a victim of a brick fight? Seaman is a game I was really excited to play. I saw the AVGN episode a couple years back, and since then I've always been very interested. On the surface, it seems to be a Tamagotchi fish care simulator, and while that's true, the one thing that makes Seaman cooler than anything this dumb egg could do is the fact that you could talk directly to the fish with the DreamCast microphone. It came packaged with Seaman in another Dreamcast game, Alien Front Online, but in that game you could actually use it to talk to other players, like in real time. And since this was before the original Xbox, it's way more impressive. And you know what the best part about the adapter is? As long as the microphone you have has an audio jack, it'll just work with the Dreamcast mic adapter. You still got a PS4 mic laying around? Yeah, that just works. But playing Seaman, it's sort of like Animal Crossing. You can only do so much in a day before your little fishies are like, alright, go away. The Dreamcast has a built-in clock too, so you gotta like actually wait the full day. After a day or two of learning the basics, you're mostly going to be checking in like twice a day for at most 30 minutes. You got to make sure the aquarium has the right temperature, the amount of oxygen and food. You know, if you don't keep everything to their standards, they die. You're in it for the long game. This shit takes a while. It's like taking care of a real fish, except they can dox and insult the fuck out of you. Another thing that makes Seaman stand out is the fact that every so often the Seaman will ask you a personal question. Sometimes it'll be how old you are, whether or not you're in school. Then sometimes they'll ask you if you think JFK is real, or if you think that the internet should be censored. It's bizarre but intriguing. And while the microphone detection isn't the greatest or good, like here's an audio clip of me trying to get the Seaman to understand me. Hello. Hello. Hello, fish. Listen to me. You having fun? You chud. Seaman. 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 Penis. Hello. Oi, oi, oi. Joking. If they don't get what you're saying after a couple times, they'll give up, and then you gotta wait until they want to ask the question again. It can be a bit annoying. But when it works, it's really charming and really cool. Vivarium Inc., the developers, even got Leonard Nimoy, aka Spock, to be the narrator.
Welcome to the laboratory of Jean-Paul Gasset.
So when you're bored as piss waiting for the Seaman to do anything, you could press the little pause button and he'll be like, what's up?
Boy, do I have to dump.
Man, this isn't a COD lobby nor a zoo. Don't fling your shit at me. Fuck you. But Seaman isn't about the destination. It's about the journey of watching these guys grow. Watching them evolve from a baby fish who can barely understand a thing to a fully articulate frog is great. Seaman was considered the first must-have title for the Dreamcast in Japan. Unfortunately, the only thing that ever came out of that was a port and a sequel. Both were exclusive to the PS2 and only released in Japan. Plans for a 3DS version did exist, but it never came to be. Especially with today's technology, another sequel to Seaman would have been really cool. Did any of these games ever come out past the mid-2000s? Not so much the Tamagotchi stuff, but more talking to the animals stuff. Like Hey You Pikachu. Seaman might be too abstract for the public anyways. Like in Hey You Pikachu, you're talking to the iconic Simpsons flavored rat instead of whatever the hell this thing is. These Seaman are scary though, so I don't blame the public. It's almost like a non-conventional horror game. Just like Illbleed. There are no shortage of horror games on the Dreamcast. There was even for some time, a Dreamcast exclusive Resident Evil game, Code Veronica. But out of all of those games, Illbleed is the most unique in my opinion. Actually, it has the most unique gameplay out of any horror game I've ever played. Even the story's a bit odd. The story is you going into a horror-themed amusement park called Illbleed after your friends go missing inside because they wanted to become a part of the 1%. There was a challenge given by the owner that if you go through the whole park, you get like $1 grillion. But your friends are stupid. Not because they believed that they could get $100 million $100 by going through a glorified haunted house, but because they don't got the experience. The main character is named Eriko, and as a child, her father would experiment random horror elements and traps on her when she was 6 years old. Yeah, no, Eriko's parents are divorced, and I don't really blame the mom, especially since the father caused Eriko to get like a sixth sense shocked therapied into existence. What is this sixth sense? Having an intuition of nearby traps. You see, instead of games like Resident Evil, where you defend yourself with a limited amount of tools and weapons, or games like Outlast, where it's more or less an elaborate hide and seek with no weapons and an even more limited amount of tools, in Illbleed, the focus is on observing your surroundings. While you're exploring the levels, walking nearby some objects will cause a mini cutscene that'll show a trap activating. When a trap activates, you will not only take some damage, but you will start to bleed, and your heart rate will increase. If you bleed too much, have too high of a heart rate, or just straight up run out of health, you die. Normally, this would encourage the player to not interact with anything, which you can't do. Sometimes the traps will be placed in doorways or staircases. You gotta disarm them, but how do you do that? By acknowledging them. In each level, you can find a horror monitor, and when you go into the first-person mode, you can scan your surroundings. Pressing on where you think a trap will be will place a little blue dot, and if you're right, boom, you don't get attacked. But wait, what's stopping you from placing blue dots everywhere? There's no challenge in this game. You know, fuck this shit. I'm going back to Rainbow Six. Okay. As an actual answer to that, placing a dot uses up adrenaline. You only have so much, so you want to really be sure that there's a trap right there. If you get it right, you get some adrenaline back, so it's not all over if you fuck up once or twice. It also helps that you get to know what trap it might be based on the 4 senses of sight, smelling, hearing, and the sixth. The first 3 are self-explanatory. For sight, oh, there's a fan on the ceiling. It's probably that. Hearing, it might be the TV. Smell, it's probably the dead guy. But the sixth, it could be an item, like to lower your heart rate, stop you from bleeding, increase your health or adrenaline, or it could just be an enemy. Yeah, you gotta clobber some evil gremlins and ghouls and goblins who will like roundhouse kick you. Sometimes you'll get lucky and find an actual weapon to use to fight against these guys, but sometimes you don't. So when you don't want to deal with the creations of H.P. Lovecraft's shitty protege, you gotta go into the middle of this little battle zone where the helipad is and spam the escape button to leave. If only you could just like Homer strangle these guys. If it's truly a horror attraction, maybe they just quit since no money is worth that shit. It doesn't help that the fighting can be very clunky. In fact, movement can be a bit difficult at times. Walking and running are completely dependent on how fast you use the analog stick, and when the camera is at a fixed point of view during battles, man, that shit makes it so much more awkward. Usually while you're going through the general gameplay, the camera system is completely fine. You know, it's like Fortnite. The game also has platforming. Just like Fortnite, which, this game was not built for that at all. You jump like it's a Castlevania game where you commit to the direction and speed when you press the jump button. The only difference with Castlevania is that not only does that game feel very deliberate with its ground placement, but it's 2D, one whole less dimension to deal with. And that kind of jumping style doesn't really translate well in 3D. It goes from something that you can adapt to into something that you don't want to adapt to because it sucks. At the end of the first level, you have to jump from one small platform to another, or else this guy will just slap you, and that'll cause you to fall and possibly land in water, which slows you down. And by the time you get back onto the platform, he's already making the slapping motion. You know, thank God for this dodge move. It just completely ignores any hitbox. The second level has another platforming section that has this dumb, stupid mud on the ground which activates an unkillable fight. Speaking of the bosses, I don't like most of them. I think the main gameplay of detecting traps and managing your dillions of health bars is actually pretty fun, and the better you do in these levels, the more money you get at the end, which means you can buy more items from the shop or more upgrades for your character stats. But when dealing with the bosses, you're already placed into the battle format, which like I said earlier is clunky as shit, but these bosses can have huge hurt boxes with this fucking stupid worm with teeth. The level that this boss is actually featured in has a neat gimmick. It's where you explore this maze while avoiding the worm creature. In fact, all the levels have gimmicks. In the second one, you don't even use the horror monitor. And in the third, you become a wood puppet, and you have to avoid getting killed by lumberjacks. They all fit with the level themes too. The levels are themed after horror movies and horror movie tropes. This gives Illbleed a very B-rated horror film feel. This was intentional, by the way, and it makes Illbleed very, ironically, lighthearted, especially if you enjoy these parodies. And you know, not to compare something to America's favorite dysfunctional family for the grillionth time, but it sort of reminds me of classic era Treehouse of Horrors, where it's a mix of a genuine homage and a parody. Illbleed constantly switches up the formula so nothing feels stale. However, since there isn't a real consistent level style, the gimmicks can be very hit or miss. The only 2 things you can count on in Illbleed is 1, being that no matter how many items you leave the level with, you don't keep a single one. You can buy and bring items into the level, but the moment you leave, all that shit is gone. And the second one being the environments. The environments in Illbleed Illbleed are really good. This game makes me feel a special type of nervousness, which is something I haven't really felt in a horror game in a while. Most horror games give me fear, but Illbleed gives me something more like unnerving, like you're in a neighborhood and it's 2 in the morning. You don't really have a reason to be scared, but you should always keep your eyes peeled. I think I get that feeling mainly because you're forced to interact with possible scares, which is kind of funny, not the neighborhood stuff, that's too real. Since this game is so stupid at times, this man is having the time of his life controlling this like big dead zombie mechanical thing that just so happens to be killing me. Like, hey, were you the guy about to kill my friend who sounds like Sonic?
That was great!
Speaking of saving your friends, at around the end of each level, you'll find a friend of yours on the ground, and once you save them, you're actually able to play as them in another level. This essentially means you get an extra life. Each friend has their own stats as well. Some will have a higher attack, higher adrenaline, or will just suck ass entirely. This means that some characters are better than others for certain levels. I just play as Erica though, she's the most consistent. And for a horror game, you definitely need consistency. But there is a time limit, and if you don't save that person within that time limit, you can't use them ever. Another consequence to not saving your friends is the ending you get. If you save everybody, you get the good ending. If you miss at least one person, you get the bad ending. But if you don't get anybody on your second playthrough via New Game Plus, you get the true ending. The most bizarre thing about the second playthrough is that when you fail to get one of your friends, Erica loses clothing, and at the end of the second playthrough, she's completely nude. Thank you, Crazy Games, also known as Climax Graphics. Even with the couple of bumps in the road, I still think Illbleed is a game worth playing. The spooky atmosphere, general gameplay, and its silly premise gives it a special feel that no other horror game has had before or since. Unfortunately, this is another game stuck on Dreamcast, and it's not even a Seaman situation where it got ported with the sequel to the PS2, even if that was only exclusive to Japan. It released a couple of days before the Dreamcast got discontinued in Japan, and about a month later in America, and nowhere else. There were plans for Illbleed to get an Xbox port, but unfortunately, the main guy behind not only the company that made Illbleed, but Illbleed itself and another Dreamcast exclusive, Blue Stinger, Shinya Nishigaki, died in 2004. The company behind the games, Crazy Games, kind of exploded in 2002 as well. So after Nishigaki's death, Microsoft decided not to continue with the port and left it at that. It was 90% complete too. Shinya Nishigaki seemed very passionate about his work, so it sucks to see that it's stuck on 25-year-old hardware and is very expensive to buy legitimately. From the interview itself, Nishigaki seemed like a real genuine person. He consistently praised the work of the other people at his company in that one interview. He also gave some insight that Blue Stinger was apparently such a success in the States that Sega wanted him to make a sequel, but he declined so he could focus on Illbleed, which is very admirable. To throw out a found formula just to experiment with other crazy shit. I wonder what Blue Stinger 2 could have been. Maybe he had some notes on it. But yeah, definitely give this game a shot, even with all of its clunk. My good chum Donovan wanted to talk about Sonic Adventure 2, so say hello, Donovan, hello!
Sonic Adventure 2 released on the console a few years after the first game, in 2001, being the last Sonic game released on the console and one of the last games released on a period. While not being too overall important for the Dreamcast itself, SA2 introduced and founded many ideas the series would use and even expand on in later installments. The game also introduced fan-favorite characters Shadow the Hedgehog and Rouge the Bat, being playable and involved in an overall darker story compared to the first game, with the 3 GOATs and Eggman. The fuck is bro doing here? And you may be asking the same thing. Or not. I mean, this game is like fucking decades old, man. You probably know why the fuck he's playable. Well, it's because he's involved in an overall new story piece from the first game. The hero and dark side stories. Ooh, yay, that's so cool. Parts of the overall story, as well as unique levels, are split between the two sides, with you playing as Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles on the hero side, and Shadow, Eggman, and Rouge on the dark side story. There's 3 different playstyles retaining to respective characters of each story. Fast-paced platforming for the hedgehogs, mech shooting stages for the big brain geniuses, and exploration-oriented treasure hunting stages for those two fuckers. Sonic still retains his moveset from the first game, with new abilities and skills you learn throughout the game. This mechanic, I feel, was to only justify the inclusion of Sonic's new 6 snowshoes, which I'm not really like complaining about at all, because it's like fucking fun as hell, man. But like, it's a little bit clunky though, so you can't home onto rails, and add to the fact that they have a small hit detection, this kind of leads to a lot of odd deaths that made you seem unfair, really jank as fuck. Shadow plays almost identically to Sonic and goes through different stages with his super swag hover shoes. Sonic and Shadow's levels are much more linear and more automated than the first game, but still have a ton of secrets and multiple routes to go through within each level. Tails' and Eggman's gameplay are an evolution of E102 Gamma's stages from SA1, retaining the lock-on shooting style of gameplay from his story. The mech control though are like a lot more clunky to control, making turning in some platforming way more cumbersome than it needs to be, which kind of sucks for a first-time player, but you'll get used to it once you play the game enough, I guess. Though once you get used to it, racking up a ton of points with a bunch of enemies in the line of sight and just fucking letting go of the shoot button is just
We'll get into this course system very shortly. It's very important to the gameplay loop.
Finally, the treasure hunting stages for Knuckles and Rouge. These levels see you running around more open stages in hopes to find 3 pieces of the Master Emerald, similar to Knuckles' story in SA1. Some stages, however, may have unique items to collect, but the objective stays mostly the same though, so don't worry about that. The radar returns from the first game as well, but like, they somehow made it worse? Somehow? Okay, in SA1, the radar could track different emerald pieces within a stage, maybe even multiple at a time if they were close enough. But in SA2, it only tracks a random one. Just one. Not multiple, just one. What this means is that you can literally run past an emerald not tracked by the radar and you wouldn't even know until the radar scans it. It doesn't really help the fact that the emeralds have much of a glow than the first game, so it's kind of hard to fucking find them sometimes. The faster you find an emerald piece, the bigger the bonus score is going to be when you collect it. Speaking of bonus score, I feel like this is a great segue to talk about why this game, and to an extension, later games, are so replayable and fun. The ranking system, baby, yay!
Woohoo! Yeah! Oh yeah!
This is where the ranking system debuted, and in my opinion, maybe aside from Unleashed, this is probably the best one in the series. I'm sure everybody in the pet Demogorgon know how a system like this works. The better you do, the better your grade is. Bing, bang, boom. But it's how you adapt and learn from the game's mechanics that make this system click. Depending on what you do through a stage, whether it's chaining consecutive homing attacks or homing shots, grinding on rails, or even taking specific routes within stages, you'll be rewarded with a bonus score depending on your actions and performance. The bigger and better the chains or actions are, the bigger and better the bonuses. And with that knowledge, learning these stages, finding the optimal routes, learning enemy placements for the biggest bonuses, or potential emerald locations for finding them as fast as possible to get an A rank is one of the most rewarding feelings I've ever felt in a video game. Straight up, dog. Not much, if any other Sonic game has had such an in-depth rank system after this game, which kind of sucks, because like, it really does incentivize players to actually get good at the game and get the best scores possible. Okay, but like, enough with all this bullshit, because like, let's talk about the real game. The Chow Garden. Ooh, I'm sure a lot of people remember this from their childhood when they played this game, which I don't blame them, because like, holy shit, this is like all another game in a game. Yeah, anyways, the Chow Garden returns in this game, with it being evolved heavily from the first game. It makes SA1's Chow Garden look like a Tet demo comparison, which is like pretty funny if you think about it, because like Chows are like much more involved in the story in the first game, but you know, I digress. Stages still have little animal critters to collect within stages from the enemies, along with the new chaos drives from gun robots and these pieces of shits. There's these Chow boxes that can be found within each stage of the game, 3 to be exact. The first one will always contain a Chow key, which will teleport you to the garden after completing the stage. The second box contains a couple animal buddies for your Chow, which like, how the fuck are they breathing in there? That's crazy. The last box you can find has a singular rare animal buddy that are usually hidden within each stage. The animal buddies and the chaos drives can be taken to your Chow and absorbed by them. Level up a specific stat, or stats is the plural, depending on the animal color or the given chaos drive. Another big evolution from the first game's gardens are the hero and dark gardens. Depending on what character you use to raise your Chow, or how you treat them, they can either become a beautiful little angel full of glee, or leaves the bathroom without washing their fucking hands. Chow can also evolve if certain requirements are met, getting a new head, halo, shape, thingy, or entirely new form. Or they could just fucking die. Yeah, like, I remember when I was a kid, my first Chow died when I played the game, and I didn't sleep much for the next few days. I'm not gonna cap with you, dude. There's also a Chow kindergarten here as well, which you can give your Chow a name over there, take them to class and learn through activities, or check up on them at the nurse and see how they're feeling. You can visit the black market over here as well for Chow eggs, food, item, and swag for your Chow. Once your Chow is leveled up enough and you feel confident, you can take him to Chow races, which have different courses that favor one or more skills that your Chow may learn. So it's pretty wise to balance out your stats to get the best results. Chow Karate is a new mode within the garden that you can play, and it sees your Chow beating the living absolute shit out of another Chow. Your stats differ in karate, however. Like your swimming, that's your defense, and your flying, yeah, that's your stealth. But nonetheless, you still want to balance out your stats. SA2 is a very divisive game within an already divisive series, with people either loving it to death or despising it with all their fiber. Me personally, I love this game so much, dude. Even with the audio issues within cutscenes that may ruin the story tone, even with the jank frustrating the hell out of me at times, I can't hate this game at all, man. There's just a certain charm to it that I love so much. Certain rawness, certain edge that I just fucking, I love this game so much, dude. Whenever I think of what Sonic means to me, in the series as a whole, I always come back to this game, no matter what. For as corny as it sounds, this game made me love Sonic so much, dude. And once you get past the very clunky and steep learning curve, this game blooms into a beautiful, fluid, badass, addictive flower that I always come back to every year. I first played SA2 in the GameCube version, which was actually one of the first Sonic games released on the home Nintendo console, which was a pretty fucking big deal at the time. Yeah, the Dreamcast kind of flopped. No surprise, and then Sega became a third-party developer after that. Yeah, Sega was making games for like Xbox, PlayStation, and even fucking Nintendo, which was, again, a big fucking deal at the time. Sonic Mega Collection was also released pretty early on into the GameCube's life, along with the port of the first Sonic adventure as well. This gave Sonic a chance to reach a bigger audience, which, hey, good on you, Sega. You may have failed, but you kinda didn't at the same time, so good job, man. The SA2 port, while not as bad as the SA1, still had a bunch of issues with audio and lighting, but was still pretty good nonetheless. It even got exclusive content for multiplayer mode, extra stages, costumes for characters, and even entirely new characters for each playstyle. It was pretty cool to add these little extras for what is frankly just kind of a box standard versus mode. Later ports of the game still used the GameCube version, while also having you pay for the DLC as an extra, which like kind of sucked, but also it wasn't that expensive and you weren't really missing too much if you don't buy it. So if you are looking to play this game, I definitely recommend the Steam version. It has mod support like the first game, so you can revert the game's graphics back to the Dreamcast version, while also adding a bunch of characters from the versus mode and getting versus mode content too. So that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Thank you, Donovan, for doing all the work for me. You will get the royalties never. Those are all the Dreamcast games I wanted to talk about, but there's one more topic related to the Dreamcast that sort of boosted the amount of games you could play on the damn thing. I think we can all agree that the Dreamcast's library is pretty good as is. But what if you wanted to play a PlayStation game? Bleem was a company in the late 90s that worked on a PlayStation emulator for the PC. Instead of Bleem being free shareware like most emulators are nowadays, you actually had to purchase a physical disc. These bastards could be found in your local gaming stores. So when the Dreamcast released, the guys over at Bleem said, fuck it, let's put a PS1 emulator on the Dreamcast. Funny enough, Sega gave the team dev kits to help them develop that special software. And the team was able to release 3 Bleemcast discs, Gran Turismo 2, Tekken 3, and Metal Gear Solid. But wait, that seems very illegal. Like, how the hell did they put Metal Gear on a Dreamcast disc? Because they technically didn't. You still had to buy the PS1 disc of whatever game, but to play it on Dreamcast, what you would have to do first is place the Bleemcast disc inside your Dreamcast and load it up. Then you would get a prompt to remove the Bleem disc and then place the PS1 game. Bleem essentially worked as a boot disc, but is this just playing a PS1 game on Dreamcast? Sort of. Some improvements were made, so playing it on Dreamcast had actual benefits, mainly the fact that it would be a higher resolution, and the game's controls were tweaked so it could fit on a Dreamcast controller. The only real negative to playing Bleemcast is that you'd have to format a VMU to save the game, so you couldn't have a Sonic Adventure save file and a Bleemcast Metal Gear save file on the same VMU. Unfortunately, only those 3 PS1 games exist for Bleemcast. What Bleem was doing was essentially soft porting a game, so it makes sense that there were only a few over the span of a couple years. Well, that and the fact that Sony sued the fuck out of the company, and even with Bleem winning the settlement, they still lost a bunch of money and had to go bankrupt. You know, I don't like to get political when making these videos, but do you think Tim Waltz had a Bleemcast disc of Metal Gear or Gran Turismo? You know, maybe he was a fighting game guy and had Tekken. Do you think he got the AT&T Sonic Adventure DLC? I wonder if the guy was stalking the news to make sure Bleem won the court case against Sony, cheering like, yeah, take that, Sony. 1 second, honey, don't throw away my Dreamcast just yet. I'm about to do a Tekken 3 local to celebrate. Just under 3 years after the Dreamcast's launch in Japan, Sega decided to discontinue the console and reform into a third-party developer. But they didn't just drop it off a river. There were still a handful of games released after the discontinuation. Even Sega published games like a sequel to Crazy Taxi, Sonic Adventure 2, and Ooga Booga. It was for the best. The amount of money they were losing was crazy. If you check Sega's fiscal annual reports, they were just on the fall. Realization! We are dying. In 2001, the at-the-time president of Sega, Isao Okawa, gave the company about $700 million to keep Sega from going bankrupt, and so tons of layoffs wouldn't happen. He unfortunately died soon after due to heart disease, but before his death, he forgave Sega's debts, which was very generous. With the money, Sega was able to fully reform into a third-party developer, and while it took a while to bounce back, they eventually did, so that's nice. What's interesting about Sega transitioning into a third-party developer is that there were plans to make the up-and-coming at the time Xbox have Dreamcast backwards compatibility. A deal couldn't be made, however. It seems to be because Sega wanted the Dreamcast games to keep their online connectivity on the Xbox, and Microsoft just wasn't having it. What did end up happening, however, is that Sega would exclusively release 11 Sega games onto the Xbox, so they could get some Dreamcast owners onto the new console. Games like a sequel to Jet Set Radio, Crazy Taxi 3, and Shenmue 2. Because of this deal, actually, Shenmue 2 only released on Xbox in America. In both Japan and Europe, Shenmue 2 got both an Xbox and a Dreamcast release, which is interesting. It's also the only reason I didn't review Shenmue 2, I swear. It's kind of funny how the Xbox was going to be a bit of a successor to the Dreamcast, even if it only was a sorta. If only the Dreamcast could have captured the American audience like the Xbox did. Oh well, I guess that Xbox Live advert was hot shit back then. Even if the Dreamcast's lifespan was shorter than the lifespan of the Confederacy, the legacy it's left is unreal. So many people to this day consider the Dreamcast to be the best console ever, and if they don't think that, there's still a high amount of respect for it. I'm not too surprised with that either. Sega experimented with a lot of cool ideas for the Dreamcast that weren't really seen before. You know, we might as well just look at all the cool shit again. We got online gaming, DLC, a screen on the controller that doubles as a memory card, which doubles or triples as a mini gaming device. A very solid first-party lineup with games that looked really, really good, especially for the time, and a shit ton of great arcade ports. There was even crossplay with Capcom vs SNK 2 between the Dreamcast and PS2. While I was working on this video, not only did the console hit 25 years old, but Newgrounds had a Dreamcast collab, which I really enjoyed. There are a lot of great animations in this collab. I definitely recommend watching it. Here are a couple of my favorites. The late 90s and early 2000s were an extremely competitive time, with many great games being released. Out of the top 20 scored games on Metacritic, 16 of them were before 2010, and 8 out of those 16 were between the years of 1998 and 2001. And look at that, Dreamcast had 2 of them, Soul Calibur and NFL 2K1. And that really shows the strength of the Dreamcast. There are a bunch of games that I didn't even talk about that you should totally check out, like Space Channel 5, Choo Choo Rocket, that one's real fun with friends, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Blue Stinger. You know, I played 2K1 and that was really fun. Typing of the Dead, Power Stones 1 and 2, which actually recently got a modern age port with the Capcom Fighting Game Collection too. And if you're cool with messing with the region locking, or have a bunch of CDRs lying around, Guilty Gear X was fun to play. Just don't play Pen Pen Tray Isolon. What the fuck? Oh yeah, and if you cared about which games I liked the most, here's a list of the games I talked about from most favorite to least favorite. And when I say least favorite, that doesn't mean I didn't like it. Quite the contrary, I really enjoyed all these games. It just sucks a ton that a good chunk of these games are still stuck on the Dreamcast or 20-year-old hardware. Games like Skies of Arcadia were ported to the GameCube in 2003, but that was 2003. Ever since I started making this video, I've actually gained a bit of a personal connection to the Dreamcast. For about a year, I've had the thing right under my desk. I also find myself playing the Dreamcast more often during Christmas time, probably because the Dreamcast has this relaxed vibe to it, just like winter. In winter, the world seems slower, calmer, and has this take-it-all-in vibe to it, just like the Dreamcast. Definitely find a way to play any of these games if they've interested you in the slightest. It doesn't have to be official hardware. I'm not gonna have a stroke if you emulate it. That'd be silly. But yeah, the Dreamcast is pretty cool.
Play that shit, Kakarot!
Quincy, you gotta check out the Dreamcast. It's so cool. It's got Simpsons, but where the fuck is it? What the fuck? Look at this. All right.
Bro really thought I was new to Leon Kennedy hobby.